to the screen so we can ask some questions. Um, I want to ask first, there's so many people that still believe in the stigma that's around special education. It does it stem from past practices? I know I had a neighbor who was, a little older than I am. She was in elementary school in like the early 60s, and she said when she was in school, she had emotional problems. She was having issues, and they just didn't want to deal with her in any type of disruptive behavior or whatever she was going through, and they just immediately just put her in special ed and just left her there to sort of just flounder. And I know this was a long time ago. I'm wondering, is this where some of this stems from, the fear of special education?
I can, from an administrator's point of view and a student who grew up in the public education system, I do think some of the myths come from a historical point of view. I do remember even in working in a system where students with disabilities, which is a way we identify our students with special needs as well, students with disabilities were given, there was a stigma attached to it. They were placed in a certain part of the building, and they were given these certain classes, and it never was really explained to people what was happening. But I will say that over the last 20 years in New York State, there's been major overhauls to how students with disabilities are classified, to how students with disabilities are treated, to staffing. There are literal mandates, very strong mandates, thankfully, that are in place to protect our students. Even more so, there are mandates in place with regard to how students are classified as special education. So I would love to start with Ms. Claiborne, who is an expert in special education, to explain for everyone who's listening, what does it take? And I don't mean to take over the questioning. I really don't. I'm sorry. But I really want people to know, what does it take to be in to have a child classified as special education? Please explain to our parents and our hosts and our guests. I'm so sorry, but that's just, I'm sorry. I'm so passionate about it.
Do your thing, Doc. Do your thing.
I'm sorry.
So I honestly, I think you started right at the perfect moment where you said how students are housed in special education in the school has evolved. When I was going to school and you had students with special needs, you walk through the hallways and you didn't see students with special needs interacting with you in the same classes, and not even knowing at that moment that I was walking through those halls. When I got into education and started working as a special educator, I noticed that there was a big push for inclusion. This was like the early 2000s, where inclusion was the push. We want to integrate our students with gen ed students, and we want them to feel a part of everything. We want them to be involved with students who are not like them, don't face the same challenges. And seeing that happen over 20 years ago compared to what's happening now, it's very interesting, because it almost feels like we're going backwards with that, because then we found other ways to separate students. But I think more than anything else, the process as far as how you attain services for your child, just how it's viewed by the community and others, is not seen in a light that, well, my child has some needs that are different from others. They need assistance. They need help. It's seen as, well, there's something wrong. They have a weakness. They can't belong a part of what we're doing. And with that being said, just to kind of see things go that way when we were all so happy about bringing everybody together, I feel like now we've just created more barriers for, allowing that to really happen. Currently today, it's like more now the push for special education services is how many services can you get for your child? How much can you advocate for your child? And that's a positive in the sense that we've come that way, where we have people who are passionate about fighting for students getting what they need, but then it becomes resource based. Depending on what district you're in or who you're able to talk to, that determines exactly what you're going to get when you come to the table. Are you going to have a group of understanding people who are able to break everything down and explain to you what this means when your child has a disability, what an individualized education plan is supposed to look like, what you're supposed to ask for when you're sitting at that table? All those things play a part. I know I touched on a lot, and I can't wait to hear what everyone else is thinking, but there's just so much to be unopened in this world, and resources are a large part of it, but absolutely how the community sees this area of special education is very convoluted and can be negative in a lot of ways. How do we change that? We don't know, but it's really up to us to make sure that we're fighting for our kids to get what they deserve.
Yeah, I would be interested to hear from each of the guests in terms of what they think about how does the stigma affect the parent and the child in terms of trying to get those resources and trying to have the child recognized as being a special, I don't know if I'm saying a special needs child or child in need of special education, and what can the parent do about that in terms of working around the stigma to try to get the child comfortable to being able to being classified in that manner so they don't get the resources and the attention that they need.
From the administrator's point of view, so and we have a parent and an educator, also an educator of a teacher of students with disabilities. From the administrative point of view, by the time I'm brought into the conversation, the teacher and the CSE, the Committee for Special Education, have done their work, and Ms. Claiborne will speak to that. But I will speak to the facts of special education. So So in New York State, as an average, it costs about $25,139 to educate each child. In different districts, the cost could be up or down, so that's an average. Districts with more money have more to spend to educate their children, but an average of $25,000. That's an average child, and I will never use the terminology normal, because that's not a terminology we should use, because who defines normal? Average is what the general child needs to be educated. If in New York City, the cost to educate the average student is $28,808 in New York State, which means Westchester, Long Island, upstate, anything outside of New York City. Now, as a district, if we have a student who's been tested through CSE, the Committee for Special Education, we have to be prepared to invest $62,000 per student to educate them. And when I say prepared to invest, that's good money. Good investment in our children. So I don't mean like it's a throwaway. $62,000. That's if the child's disability warrants that they stay in district or in our schools and we can help them. If we have to educate our children outside of the school, that can start at $80,000. So we asked about how do we debunk the myth about that special education is being used against our Black and Hispanic students. I'm going to give you the facts. A general education's child can be educated for under $30,000. A student with disabilities will be educated for almost double that, $61,000 and up. I don't know a conspiracy that someone would impose on someone that would cost them more money. So if you think about it that way, if those are just the general facts. When we go into educating our students, we have to think about teachers, fringe benefits. Teachers meaning I can have a class size of 34 with one teacher. Under special education rules, we either have a maximum of 8 students or 12 students or 15 students or even less, which means double the staff. In addition to that, I may need a paraprofessional or monitor or teaching assistant. I also need to cover what can be used for technological assistance. We may need assistive technology, hearing and seeing devices. We may need mobility devices. I also may need to deal with the social, emotional, and or physical, which means a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, a speech therapist, a social worker, a psychologist, a school nurse. That's all what it takes to educate a student who has been deemed a student with needs. That's good money being spent. I am saying that as a plus. If we know what your child needs, then we can do everything we can to ensure that your child gets what they need. Of course, like in every profession, there are bad apples, and there are people who use it differently and may use it as a threat. But as an educator, and always thinking of the purest thing for all of my students, I am in no way rushing to get any child into special education like it's a cult. What I try to do is get the best services for my children. I'm sorry, I think of all of the students as my children. So when you hear me say that, I'm thinking of my students. I'm always trying to get the best thing that my students need in terms of equity versus equality. Equality, everybody gets the same thing. Equity means that everyone gets what they need to make it. That's what I do. That's my take on special education. It is, if you think about it as a financial part, as the money parts of it, it doesn't make sense to steer people. If you think about conspiracies, if you think about the political landscape on any level, a good administrator and good educators, which most of us are here to ensure that our students are given the best chances that they can.
You've said so much in that, and just to piggyback on that, you're right. The numbers don't lie, but I go back to resources and how they're allocated based on the conversation at the table. When a student is first classified, there's a process that basically works in that every single person, a part of that educational process, is sitting at the table. That's the parent, that's the administrator, those are your teachers, everyone who is able to evaluate where the student is and whether or not they qualify, for those services, basically have them at this table. So now you're at the table, you make a decision. What's the disability or classification going to be for this student? That conversation goes on. And depending on the style and how the meeting is ran, there may be an informational session about each disability and what that entails and what that means. Because even those things get tricky too, because, classifying a child with a learning disability might go over well as opposed to leaving the table with an emotional disability classification or other health impairment or multiple disabilities. Certain words kind of like really get to people and make them feel like, they should be ostracized from their community because of it. And also, not only that, it's just the knowledge of knowing what all these things mean. It starts at getting the classification. All right, now what services is my child going to be entitled to? And then when those services start to kick in, let's just say in a general education school where they spend about $30,000 on average to educate that child, maybe it doesn't work out and they may have to outsource that student and see if they qualify for services in a program like where I work at in BOCES. So now you're like almost tripling the cost of what it takes to educate that student and give them the services that they need, whether it be physical therapy 3 times a week, occupational therapy. These are all positive things. But then getting back to the stigma, all right, now that child has to get on that bus and go back to their community, and the other students know that they go to this special school. This is where now that family is faced now with having to feeling like they have to explain themselves to the community. Oh, well, my child only goes to this school because of this, but it shouldn't be that. And for whatever reason, that's kind of where we're stuck at with the notion that we should have the belief that when you sit at the table and you fight for these services for your child, this is what you want to see. These are the things you want to happen, but it shouldn't become, oh, now my child can't participate in the regular school. Now they're different from everybody else. And now I need to hide, and I don't need to let people know that my child has these needs, and it's just unfortunate because in other communities, it's kind of like they take pride in knowing that their child is going to get what they need. Instead, it's almost like, now I have to hide. I don't want anybody to know. It's I've seen it happen, for over 20 years, just the attitude towards special education. And that's why I kind of stayed in it, because for me, I feel like if you don't have people who understand this aspect of it, then people are really lost about what they need to do and who they need to tap into to get what they need.
As a parent, I think the concern becomes the understanding. Like, I think we don't truly understand the levels to special education, because again, the journey of our children is important. We want their spirit to feel whole. So if they're sitting in class with a special teacher, even though we know the benefit, they want to be the same. So having them ostracized among their peers as needing extra help, their career and experience in class is going to now be a problem, and a parent may pull back from the service because their children experience in the classroom is not what is not being handled in a way where the child feels as if that they're not going to be judged for this extra service that they're getting. So I think there needs to be some type of rebranding when it comes to special education, because there's not a clear understanding as someone who is mentally challenged, who will not be able to be productive and operate as an adult, efficient adult, versus a person who just have a learning curve and needs extra assistance. It's just all umbrellaed under one. So if there was levels to it, where it was like, oh, I'm A of special ed, like it ain't that deep. I just have this ailment. I have this one little issue, and I take care of this issue during lunch. Nobody's aware of me doing speech therapy because it's my business. I don't have to share that among my peer group, because the children, they don't, from my experience dealing with my daughter and her friends, they want to be the same. The moment they are different, those are the target points. And we're in a culture where that label, special education label, is not catered in a positive way. And then we also have, the Black Conscious Society that's teaching, like Dr. Omar Johnson. He has so many podcasts and teachings that don't put your children in special education, don't let them be evaluated. He didn't explain the entirety of it, so that was a misconception too. Not to say it's his fault, but there was an era of just thinking that, if you put your child in this program, they're not going to get a regular diploma. They're going to get a certificate of completion. It's not going to allow them to go ahead and go into a 4-year college or institution. And so not understanding the levels is like a conspiracy. Is what is it? Like, where do I fit in? And how do I progress in it, not knowing it? So
yeah. And, that's a really good point, because even like, for instance, once you review the testing, and you would probably speak more to this to answer this part of it, but the most interesting part of the meeting is when you discuss what the evaluations determine. And when you have to sit at the table and tell a parent what their child's IQ is, for instance, or maybe how they're performing at the level compared to their peers. This is really important information that you're discussing about someone's child. And I think, sometimes it's just, oh, well, the IQ is 73 and, that's it. No, you need to really break that down. What does a person who has the IQ of 73, what are their behaviors like? What kind of abilities do they have with that particular IQ? So that parent can understand, looking down the road, what is the long-term goal for their child? Because there's just such a wide range of disabilities. When we're talking about students who may be able to function, like I spoke about earlier with inclusion, you may be able to sit in a mainstream class and learn social studies and ELA and get a Regents diploma, because that's where your disability kind of lies, in the sense that you may have the ability to aspire and be well in all these areas, but maybe over here you have some weaknesses you have to work on. But maybe another child who may have an IQ in that area may not have the same skills, and they need those skills to be built up. Now, in order to be able to increase those skills and give them the services that they need, that parent also needs to know that they need to ask for additional services, even in addition to what's being offered at the table. They need to know they are entitled to asking for additional reading support if their child didn't attain a certain level when they have gotten to that grade level. So it's
and the teachers have to protect the child too in the process of learning, because I think that's the part, is healing that shame, correcting the insecurity of the label. Because I may know all the benefits, my child, we know we shouldn't have to campaign and now be the campaigners of special education because we're receiving the service.
And that's what I want to say, because while I explained everything with special education, I don't want anyone coming for me as though I don't live in a bubble, as though I live in a bubble. And I do know the stigma, and I do understand how Black and brown and the disenfranchised across the races, Black and brown and other people of color are treated in where we are. I do understand that. So when I explain special education, it's in the purest sense of the form. That's what it should be. The same thing Ms. Claiborne is talking about. But then when we get to, and the same thing you're talking about, Kiva, we want the best for our kids. But again, when we get, I used to tell my staff all the time, we wake up as people. And unfortunately, some people are not good. They're not great. Those people go into places and they are in positions of power. So the best way to do it is to be educated about what you're supposed to do. Forums like this, where we explain what special education is, where we can explain the services that you're supposed to ask for and how we monitor these behaviors. You said it perfectly, Kiva, where sometimes our students are not treated with the utmost respect and dignity. And if anyone who's ever, and Ms. Claiborne knows, we worked together for years, it is important to me that when we have these meetings and our parents come up and our students come up, we just demystify. We don't say in education, we are really big on alphabet soup. There's a letter and an acronym for everything, because that's the language we speak. Just like doctors speak a language, just like Uncle Kev, lawyers speak a language that the outsider doesn't understand. We must, as educators, bring it to a level where the average person can understand us. And I don't say talk down, because that's diminutive. We must bring our education to a level, because if we're teachers, we should be teaching where people understand us. So when we do meetings, and we've done them, we don't say CSE to parents. We say the Committee for Special Education. And then we explain what special education is. And then when we make references and we tell them the services that they can get, I ensure, and I made it a charge for my staff, we explain to parents. We explain it a lot. We explain it again. And then we explain it some more. And then we give them an opportunity. And I know, and because I've actually advocated for my friends who are very educated in their children's school to get the services that they need. So I understand what you're saying is absolutely right, Kiva. We need more education. And I don't mean formal education. I mean the education about educating our children. We also need more dignity and respect to be given to our parents and our families, because we need to understand that regardless of their social economic status or anything about them, everyone wants the best for their children.
Yeah.
Start
also,
there. Yes.
Yeah. And even to add to that, I think, another important piece is not just, explaining and guiding and providing that piece. That's the first step. But to take it even a step further, I think also just understanding the difference between the disability and maybe some other factors that play a part, whether it be environmental, whether it be your upbringing, whether it be circumstance. Like, all these considerations have to be a part of the conversation, because while a student may have an emotional disability, some may want to debate and say, well, is this an emotional disability, or is this because of the way that they were raised? And that can look very different from depending on where that student is coming from, meaning community-wise, what circumstances they were brought up in, what definitely their social economic status has a big part in that. So, all these things are part of the conversation. However, I just think a lot of times there's not enough understanding to where each student is coming from. But the understanding may come in some places depending on who's sitting at the table. But I think at the tables for our children, the thing that we have to put together is providing our parents with the tools to help them be able to explain the two to help their child. Because again, going back to that emotional disability, yes, there may have been some trauma in that child's experience, but that's the reason why we're sitting at the table. There shouldn't be a determination of what they can't do, and even sometimes even manifest into here the time that like really gets to stuff. But the thing that it really gets into is like, all right, you have the other events that took place in their life, but now how do we help this family and not judge them based on these things that occurred, and really focus on the disability? This student is unstable with their social emotional health because of experiences that they've had, but also it could be some hereditary elements involved in that. There could be some other pieces that may need to be explored, but the understanding of it is just not there. And no one really takes that time to understand why we get to the table, how we get to the table, and even getting that parent to explain how much time do we sit at these meetings and how much time is given to the parent to really break down what has been going on with their child to bring them to this point. There's just so many pieces to unlock with that aspect of it. But I just think it's like we could talk forever about this. I mean, at least I can. It's just so much that gets missed or doesn't get explained. And when you do take the time to explain to one parent, that's only part of the battle, because now you have to go and attack the other 10 that are sitting there waiting and not really having the knowledge that they need when they're sitting at that table.
Okay, I got a question. Please explain the difference or the distinction between learning disability, educational disability. I've heard these terms, and you mentioned emotional disability. What are the differences? How you distinguish those from one another?
There's so many. There's a lot of test evaluation that goes on to make these determinations. There are 13 classifications in special education. Whether it be a learning disability, emotional disability, autism, vision and hearing impairments, speech language impairment. You also have a multiple disabilities classification. There are more that I'm missing, but autism is actually another classification as well. And with that being said, you have 13 categories that you have to try to sit at the table, look at the numbers, whether it's the IQ of the student, how they perform on psychoeducational testing, looking at their social history and breaking that down. All these factors are determined, and the committee decides and basically comes to a consensus on what the disability will be. Now, there are very wordy definitions of all those disabilities I just named, and just reading them cold, you wouldn't have a clue where to begin with understanding them. A student with an emotional disability, obviously, I'll start with that one. That one is where the emotional part of the child interferes with their ability to learn. And that could be an experience, it could be something traumatic, it could be maybe another condition that they may have that doesn't fall under any of those 13 categories. Essentially, those are the factors that affects or preclude their ability to function the way that they need to as compared to their peers. A learning disability is a little different because usually, there's a certain way that we learn as people, but with a learning disability, usually in the testing, there's some indications of significant delays. Like, maybe your reading level is 3 or more levels below grade level. Your understanding of and thinking when they do these psychoeducation tests determine that maybe you're just not grasping the information correctly, and your processing may not be as quick as it should be to be able to attain the material and learn in school the way that you need to. Or maybe it's attention. There's so many different tests that exist. You can be tested for dyslexia, but dyslexia is not a classification. It goes under the category of a learning disability. But there's a whole test that school districts don't even pay for in order to be given that diagnosis of dyslexia or dysgraphia, where you see numbers backwards as well. So it's really understanding what those disabilities mean, what the behaviors are. Autism is another one that we're still learning about. Heard about it when I first came on the scene in education, but there's just so much to be worked into to help parents understand the disability, as none of us can, because this is one disability that you can have 5 students who are classified with autism and they behave very differently from one another. They have different challenges socially, mostly, but there's just so much to unlock when you break down these definitions of what makes a disability. Vision and hearing are also some difficult ones to handle, because there are a lot of specialists in that area that you have to find and make sure you have them on your staff to service those students who have those needs. You have multiple disabilities, which could include cerebral palsy and a number of other physical disabilities as well. There's just so much that goes into that. And if you don't know that, like, just, I mean, it's so much to learn that I learned in a couple decades, that there's no way you can expect a parent to sit at the table and be able to process it all, even if you were to hand it over to them to read it.
Can I ask, things like when you hear people talk about learning styles, like they have different learning styles, are these things that are part of special education as well?
No, learning
No.
style is it's a theory that I know that was not first, but a prominent man is Howard Gardner, who talks about the different learning styles, and that essentially means the ways in which you learn best. It has nothing to do with any sort of classification. So I'll take for an example, I learn best, and no one ever asked me. I just realized the way I learn best is literally by reading or seeing. I'm not what's called an auditory learner. So consequently, I don't really listen to music or anything. I don't listen to a lot of things. I need to read. I need to see. And that's the way I'll remember. So people in my schools will say, I asked Dr. Darby a question. You can ask me what you like, but it's not cemented in my head until you email me. So there are different learning styles. And I'll put up a resource for learning about different learning styles. If more of our educators knew, and our parents, Kiva, if more of our parents knew about our learning styles, that's a way that we can converse more with our teachers. Because remember, teachers meet your child the first time in September, and they have a year to teach them all of this stuff. So I have actually said, sort of jokingly, but not, IEPs, individual education plans. Students with those are kind of lucky because they come with the manual. They literally come with the piece of paper saying this is how they learn. Not that I'm advocating for it, but if you're a teacher of a student with disability and you have a 12 in your class, you read this and you know how they're educated. I think if more people knew how I was educated in school, while I was intelligent, can't say I was the best behaved, that's neither here nor there, but because they didn't know how to educate me, how to do it, keep giving me a book. Give me a book after book after book, and you will shut me up. So that's a really good question. Knowing how our students and our children learn is a great way to start helping them to learn.
Right. And I know I figured out that I am a visual and tactile learner, and I didn't figure that out until I was an adult. So yeah, I can see how a bit of insight into each student can help a teacher in delivering that instruction. Something else that, as far as the special education goes, that strikes me, and I had children come through the New York City public schools as well, and one attended one of the New York City private schools, and in both situations there were white families who truly advocated to get those services of special education for their children. There was no hesitation at all. I mean, they were literally demanding, like, I better see XYZ because I know my daughter needs blah, blah. I mean, literally, like, no hesitation, none. So it's like that stigma, is it partially cultural for us, where we have such a deterrent to it? Because they did not, just like each of my students, each of my children had students in their classes. For one, they were not separated out, but the majority of the students were white who had the IEPs, and they ended up doing well. One of my children had an IEP in middle school, and it seemed like it definitely helped in the area where she needed help, and she ended up graduating college recently, summa cum laude with highest of honors. So and it again, because it was very inclusive in her classroom, in her schools, there were a lot of affluent white families in those schools, so there was no separating, there was no treating anyone differently. When it came to having a label or whatever, it was treated like it was okay, there's nothing wrong with this, we're still all in our classes together, we're still all the same people. Is there something that's specifically for us as people within the Black community that has stuck with us about this being bad? Like, why is it that we can't let this go? When I see these children when it comes time for these standardized tests to happen, there's unlimited test time, so that, where other people have 2 hours to finish the test, children would, have unlimited test time. So if you need that time, you have the time to finish the test. My daughter was not a good test taker, and whatever other things that there are, people like clamor to make sure their kids receive these things, but it wasn't us.
Kiva, could you talk about that? Yeah.
I was going to say, I think it would help if we heard more success stories when it comes to special education versus the negative component. Because I didn't know that, your child gets more test time and all of the other benefits that's included. If we are aware of the testimonies of how it actually worked and it's our face and family backing it, that's a different story, because we normally see it in a way where it's a negative, where someone is being bullied for it, and then the story ends there. We don't see the success stories of when there's no bullying, when the entire school is in accordance in how they're administering the extra resources. Because when it's had, even I remember as a child when it was had, the children that was receiving the service, they were bullied. They were not a part of the in crowd. So that has to be managed within the school system.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of what Auntie Joy was saying about the testing time, that has to do with the accommodations and modifications. So once you go through the CSC Committee on Special Education and they decide on, the evidence leads to a classification, then we have to talk about what accommodations and or modifications will help this student achieve the most. So some students just need a little extra time, so they may get time and a half. So if a test takes a half an hour, they get that plus half time. Some students can get untimed testing. Some students may get tests read to them depending on the test. Some students may get to test in a separate location. And just think about that. If I don't know, a lot of people are nervous about testing, but imagine if you were in the purest sense of it, not if we step aside from the stigma and how adults are working, how adults actually use the system. If we think about it, if you're very nervous in a test and you get to sit in a room with 5 other people to take your test and you get double the time everyone else, that's providing you with an accommodation you need. Not everybody needs that. But if the Committee on Special Education says you need that and it's done with fidelity and respect and dignity, you are going to get that. However, there's places where they may just call you out. Sally, come out. You have to go to another place and take your test. Then she's in the spotlight. Nobody wants to be seen as different, especially in middle and high school. Are you kidding me? So they won't go. They'll sit back and they won't avail themselves of the opportunity for this. So again, that goes back to teachers and administrators. All of them, not just teachers of students with disabilities, all teachers and administrators, everyone in the building, ensuring that we educate our kids in a way that allows them to maintain their respect and their dignity. So if we can get our kids also to self-advocate enough. So if we talk to Sally about these processes, so Sally knows that when she's to have a 5th period ELA test, that she goes straight to her other testing area. Getting our kids to advocate for themselves helps it also. But again, that comes with knowledge and education. So our CSC perhaps shouldn't just be a meeting where we throw out these letters. There should be another meeting where mom or guardian, dad, mom, guardian gets to go home with their child, discuss it, and then come back a day or 2, 3 days and say, these are the questions that came up. Then we have a follow-up meeting and we talk about this and we say, ask every question you have. We cannot reveal students who are getting the services. We can reveal the teachers who do it. We can allow you the opportunity to meet with those teachers. We can allow a teacher to explain exactly what they're doing. We can do that. We're supposed to do that. We should do that. And you better demand it as a parent. You, as a parent, demand transparency. Demand everything that happens with your child in school. You must know about it. Everything. If you can't know about it, then they shouldn't be doing it. Every conversation that's had about your kid, everything that's written about your kid, even ask them, what is the perception of my child in this school? If they can't tell you, they shouldn't be doing it. We have to be that clear with our parents. And every parent, there's not a parent who can say that I wasn't transparent. Even if they said, how's my kid? And I have to say, the general preconceived notion about your child is that he or she may be a little rambunctious in class. And then I'll change it around to, people think your kid is bad sometimes. Like, seriously, you just have to tell the parents the perceptions, everything. And I'm not saying that that's the truth. You need to know everything that happens about your child in that building. And you need to be educated. And we need educators who are truly educated and not scared about their position, or to tell the truth. Just tell the parent. We can get in the way of a lot of. I teach de-escalation, and one of the things that we teach in de-escalation is a rational answer needs a rational response. A reasonable question, a rational question needs a rational response. So if you ask me a question, I should be able to answer it. If I can't answer it about your child, then I should not be doing it. Because again, the purest form is that we are doing what works for kids. But people come to jobs with their implicit biases, with their prejudice, with their out and out hatred, or whatever their reasons are. Those people exist. The people that I work with and the people that I try to bring forward are the people who don't. So we are trying to be that stopgap. We're trying to be the people at the door who are ensuring that your children get the education that they need. And like Ms. Claiborne said, that keeps us going every day when sometimes we are kind of tired and don't want to do it again. That keeps us going. I know for a fact because we talk about it all the time.
Let me ask this question. Can you explain what a 504 plan or IEP is, and then explain to our audience what's the difference in terms of how they're implemented and what that means for somebody's child?
So a 504 plan is really simple, and really this was one of the best laws that could have come about when the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act came about. And basically, if your child has a condition, whether it be asthma, some sort of physical condition that they may have, medical condition that they could be diagnosed with, that basically interferes with their ability to function as every other student would be. So let's take asthma, for instance. Asthma, as we know, is a very challenging condition for any child because of the days of school they may miss, because of some of the medical attention that a student with that condition might require, etc. So a 504 plan just basically gives that parent the opportunity, or those parents, to have an opportunity to have a document that lets everyone in the school know about, that the child has this condition, but also there may be some accommodations that come along with that condition. So for a student with asthma, they may need breaks, or they may need time to go in and check their breathing levels, because sometimes, there could be some sort of anxiety that comes about. Let's say with test taking, they may need accommodations. Or maybe it's not that. Maybe they have diabetes and they have to go check their levels periodically throughout the day. This 504 plan puts that in writing and gives them that ability to carry that document with them through their educational career. An IEP is a lot more involved because, like I said, the 504 plan is pretty straightforward. You get the diagnosis from a physician. It's done. Once you have that, the document is created. It's no more than 2 pages. An IEP is a lot more involved because you have to qualify for these services. Your student has to get tested. There's a committee that decides whether the classification will be honored, and a document, which we call an individualized education plan, is created. When that plan is created, the teachers, school psychologist, social worker, sometimes even administration get involved in the creation of this document. And this document is very important. And I attended this conference way back when through Western Suffolk BOCES that talked about student-directed IEP, where you actually went through the entire IEP from start to finish with the student, and you explained everything to them, down from the classification that they have on themselves. Like, you let them see it in black and white. And that is very powerful in so many ways, because in this instance, once you get them to that level, they understand what's being said about them and what is on paper about them. But not only that, they can also advocate for themselves. Let's say if they get into a testing environment, someone forgets that they get extended time, and they say, oh, no, guess what? No, I get extra time. That's more for your students who are in secondary, who are a little more can speak up for themselves, and that's something that develops over time. So there's a lot of power in that. But an IEP, you know, depending on what community you're coming from, means different things to different people, because a parent who has the know-how to look through all the terminology and everything that's being said can read through that IEP and say, hey, what is this sentence about my son or daughter? I don't really agree with this one. Can we omit that? They have the ability to do that. But then you might have another parent where an IEP can be anywhere to 10, 12, I've seen 15, 20 pages long. If you can't really understand everything that's in that document, no one's broken that down for you, you have no understanding of what's being said about your child. You go to the meeting, and let's say we're past the point now where you've had the initial meeting where your child starts to receive services. You're doing a yearly checkup now. You have annual review, and you're having a conversation about the IEP, and they might talk about goals that they want to set for the student. There's so much that can be discussed about this particular document, but someone has to take the time to go through all those things, down to what your learning interests are, what your physical abilities are. Do you need behavior strategies? Do you need program modifications? Do you need services? All these things are on this document. And again, going back to having the ability to read through it all and understand it all is one thing, but you know, depending again on where you are and who's running the meeting, they may have the IEP posted up for everyone to see, and they go through each section, or they may gloss over it very quickly and say, hey, I'll send you a copy in the mail. For a parent who's new to this game and how, not even game, but new to this process and how it works, sending them a 20-page document doesn't work, because they don't really understand everything that's in it. And some people are very good and very diligent about how they deliver that information or go through that information with the parent. And they are very detailed when they explain each category. This is what's being said. This is what's being done. But a lot of times that doesn't happen because, you know, we are always, you know, on schedule. We have a schedule that we have to follow. We have to speak within a certain time frame during that meeting. But for me, especially in the position that I'm in now, I like to call the parent after. Did you understand everything? Did you know what really took place in that meeting? Do you have any questions? You know, because they should have the ability to do that at any moment. Some parents, I always remind them, this is always a big one. You could go to the table and sit at the meeting and agree to all the terms of a meeting. But as a parent, you have that right to say, I want to come back to committee to discuss this. Anytime you want. You could do it this week. You can do it next month. You can do it 2 months from then. However many times you want to come to the table and discuss what services your child has, you have the right to do that. Now, is that encouraged? No, because again, we're talking about time and we got to pull teachers and providers out of class. But those are the conversations that need to happen to bring that understanding for our community. You know, it can't be a 10-minute conversation, or it can't be everyone speaking these terms over their heads and not really asking the parent for if they need clarification or if they need to hear this in a different way. And you know, like I said, I don't want to take any credit away from any particular person and how they run meetings. A lot of people are very good at how they you know, operate things and how smoothly they can deliver the information and really break everything down. But then sometimes just a matter of, we got to get the meeting done. Let's talk about the key points and then we're done. And sometimes that's not enough time for the parent to really process everything that has happened. Special education involves so much patience and so much care and so much detail. And you just have this huge range of need where, you know, you might have a student that might require a few things. Yeah, they can get through their educational career and a meeting won't really make a difference in the impact it might have on that student. But then you have some of our kids who have very intense, severe needs and things that need to be addressed. And that's not a quick conversation. And it's not just a meeting at the table. It might be a side conversation with the administrators who are involved, with the teachers who are involved. This is a group effort, you know, in order to understand it. And let's just say, even also too, something that's been kind of like resonating as everyone's speaking, you know, determining progress from year to year is a big thing. You have this document, it changes every single year what your child is entitled to. But you have to decide as the parent, are you going to ask for more services? Are you going to ask for something differently to be done if you're not satisfied with those services that are being given? For example, your child could be participating in special education for 5 years now, and you don't see any improvement in their reading ability. What do you do as a parent? Do you go to the table and say, well, you listen, maybe some of the people at the table might say, well, the disability is kind of what is causing the delays for your child. But then you might say, but then maybe they missed a lot of time because of this factor or that factor. You still have the right to ask for some sort of specialized reading because you want to see that addressed for your child. Can't year after year be, go along with this explanation. No, it's the disability that's what's doing it. But really, is it? Or is it that something else is required to get that child where they need to be? And that might require more money, more resources. And, the world that we're in now, the shift that I'm seeing now is more parent advocates showing up at the table. Going back to that thing I mentioned earlier, where if you don't have the ability to pay a parent advocate, you're not going to have that person sitting at the table. But when I first started, when I was sitting at Committee on Special Education meetings, they had voluntary parent members sitting on the meeting, kind of guiding and helping the parents. That was a requirement. It isn't so much anymore because of, I guess, of just how things have changed. But you don't have that person sitting there kind of nudging the parents saying, hey, ask for this. Hey, you should inquire about that. They need that support. And coming from an area where I kind of saw where things were more cohesive and it was like a team effort, now we're moving towards, well, if you have the resources to seek this out, then good for you. You'll be able to fight for your child to get them what they need. But if you don't have the know-how, and let's say you've had some struggles yourself and you can't even begin to pull apart this process, then you kind of fall by the wayside with it all.
Wow.
As a parent,
Kev, hold on. I want to hear more from Kiva.
I was going to say, as a parent who, after Dr. Darby explained to me how the benefits of special education, I had a hard time convincing my daughter's father to be in agreement with it, because he just held on to the stigma. He didn't want it for his daughter. He felt that her having to even be considered for special education meant that we failed as parents who prided ourselves in teaching her. So I don't know if there's even some type of concise pamphlet or information that just lists all of the pointers as to all the benefits of special education, because from the administrative portion and just even hearing how the money is shared, oh my jelly beans, my son, please stop. It shows how the benefit is there as far as the resources, but as the receiving sector, we're just dealing with the stigma, and then the child not wanting to feel, ostracized within their community. So I don't know if there is a concise pamphlet, because now as a parent, we pulled her out of charter school, put her in private sector. So, and I don't really like this new school she's in, but I'm allowing her dad to lead this year, and we both assess what happens after this year. But it would be great to know that we don't have to spend all of this money in Catholic school and private school when we have this public education at our, especially in New York, where we can take advantage. But it's just that stigma is heavy, because
and I don't want to make it seem like it's not like a program where everyone gets a chance. So, because when you say benefit, I know what you mean, but I don't want people to think that we're saying, hey, get your kid in special education. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is, because there is a process, there's actually waiting periods where if the teachers are concerned, then we have to sort of intervene before we go all the way there, because the thought of special education is least restrictive environment. So it's not like one day your kid fails the test and when I say special education, that's absolutely not it. What happens is there's a pattern of things that we notice as educators, either behaviorally or academically, and then we start having discussions amongst ourselves in our school. So in a traditional school, it would be maybe me as the principal bringing it up to Ms. Claiborne as a special education teacher and as the chairperson of the department. And then we start the conversation, or even the parent brings into our attention. So I want all of the listeners to know there's actually a child study done on your child. So it's not like, hey, my kid failed to test their special education. Absolutely not. Right. So there's actual tests done where you have to take paperwork sometimes back to your actual doctor to find out some symptoms that are going on. So it's literally a child study. Some cases it comes back to your child is not a student with a disability, but there's some behavioral things that we could do as a school to make sure, and working with the parent. Maybe they're not sleeping well enough. Maybe they're playing, literally things like that. But then there's times where we've tried, and there is something called an RTI, period response to intervention, where we actually try different interventions to see if they work. If they don't, then we keep trying. Okay, now let's do a tier 2. Let's do a tier 3. So it's not like you just go into it. It's a child study. We study your child. We study the home environment as much as we can through interviews and through paperwork. And the doctor rules out certain things. And then we figure out. And then even after that, we have the least restrictive environment. So we might try them in a class that's combined with students without IEPs and with IEPs. And then we try something else, because we always try to keep them in mind of the stigma that's associated, just like there's stigmas associated with mental health. And sometimes there's stigma associated with COVID. And there's just who knows where stigmas come from, but some reasons there are. So we try to deal with all of that to ensure that your child gets what they need in the least restrictive environment for the smallest amount of time possible. And then we go back and we review and we review and we review. But definitely conversations like this, and like you said, a pamphlet, I am all for filling the gap. If there's no pamphlet, then maybe that's something I'll be texting Ms. Claiborne about and saying, hey, we need to do a pamphlet. So maybe, and we'll have you on that also, so you can look at it from a person's point of view who's not on our side of it. Because while we understand it, because we do this, we have almost 50 years between the two of us. Oh goodness. But having lay people who are not in it see it. So maybe that sounds like something that's absolutely something I'll be moving forward on. So you'll be hearing from me.
When it comes to I'm sorry. I was just going to say, just to add to that, try to make it as quick as possible. But I think there has to be that exists for this. You know, we used to have I remember a time where special education PTAs existed separately from your original PTAs that were formed to be a support group for parents. I think there needs to be more of that. You need a support group. You need people who are going through the same thing that you're going through to be able to have someone who has that understanding. You know, that's the only way to kind of knock out that stigma. And also, you just need more people like us to be around to kind of undergird and guide people. You know how many family members I've helped in terms of like early intervention, seeing certain things kind of like being a little off, and not in a way that I made them feel like, oh my gosh, go get your child checked out, but in the sense that something is going on and you need to find out what that is. Whether it was a speech delay, whether it was the early onset of, and they're not diagnosed with autism just yet, but there are some things that you notice that are happening that you point out to your family. And don't get me wrong, it's a 50-50 toss. Some family members are very receptive to it. Okay, what do I do? Tell me what I need to do. And others, oh no, I think it's just, it's just this going on. I want to say it's that happening. So it's just like taking on that responsibility to help each other in that way, I think is important, and really pointing those things out. But of course, that person has to have some level of respect for you to receive that. Again, like I said, not everybody was always so welcoming to me saying, I'm noticing something's happening with your child and you need to look at that. And you need to do it now, because more often than not, working in the secondary setting, I've seen students get diagnosed after they're in 6th, 7th, 8th grade. There's so much that they've missed before that point, and so now to try to get services to try to help with that, it's going to be difficult, because now you're talking about 6-7 years of things that weren't addressed for all that time. So it's just, I think having people around you that are going to support you with it is key. And you need to kind of quiet the naysayers with that a little bit. People who are not so open, they just need to be educated about it. But I think really you just need groups of people together, like myself, like Dr. Darby, who can really help guide that. But also you need parents who are just like you that are going through the same kinds of things. Hey, yeah, when this first happened, I was like this when this was going on. And maybe say, this is what I did to kind of get to the level where I am now. And that can be on any level. It could be elementary support group, because it's very different, the stages you could go through, with the services that you're asking for. And secondary is a different animal, because now you're talking about graduation requirements and, what track is your child going to be on? Is it going to be vocational? Like, there's so many different things, but I think a support group would be a place to start. Pamphlet, I think, is more like a book as opposed to a pamphlet. But there's just so much information to pack in there. But I think more than anything else, we have to support each other. That's the only way we get through this.
Yeah, definitely. Before we wrap, like you said, we could go on and on. There's so much information to share. Here in Brooklyn, we have the Mary McDowell School, and I wanted to know, are there other schools like that are available for students if your standard public school does not have the resources to help that student? And also a lot of parents, I don't know if parents from the Black community understand the process to get into something like Mary McDowell if needed. When they hear you have to sue the Board of Education, does that scare people away from doing that? So that, because obviously the majority cannot afford that full private school tuition like other demographics might be able to. And they also have several people who go right ahead and sue the Board of Education for tuition as well.
I was just going to add, before somebody add more an expert opinion on this, I have a sister friend who was a judge specifically for education. It would be good to see if we can do this another time, like a round 2 with her included, because I just remember that.
And as far as education, so I can't speak to New York City and suing the Board of Education. Honestly, I can't. I do know that parents have been brought to that. But again, schools will always try to see, districts will always try to see what we can do in-house first. And just to see if, so I guess like anything else, there's a level, there's always people who will sue immediately, and you have the right. This is America, you have the right. But in school system, there's that the part where we can just see if the services are working and work with the school. There's some points where it gets to the point where it's not working, and you have to do what you have to do. And that as a parent, if the school, if you try to reach your teachers or your principal and you can't ever meet them and you can't get the answers you want, then you absolutely 100% should take the steps that you need to protect your child. I'd be a hypocrite if I said I wouldn't go all the way. I know if you're dealing with an administrator like me, I know I'll do whatever I can. And honestly, if it gets to the point where I say maybe you should try other avenues, I seriously mean maybe you should try other avenues. I'll call you later and tell you about it. So, I mean, seriously, so it depends on the path you want to take, and you can go. But again, like anything, everybody has the right to sue. But if you don't have your ducks in a row, a lawsuit will go nowhere. If my child failed the test and I say, hey, now I want to sue the Board of Education, there's so many steps in between that you didn't do that it will go nowhere. So if you're going to bring a lawsuit, you have to ensure that you've exercised all of the avenues up to leading that, and that's in any lawsuit, honestly.
I just want to clarify, when I say sue, I'm saying what people do in order to get into a school like Mary McDowell when the public school cannot accommodate the special education needs. It's a private school, and the Board of Education will pay to transfer your student to that school. And just so other parents understand what that means. But it is a process you have to go through. And like you said, to show that the school did everything that they needed to do in the public school, and really cannot accommodate your child.
Yeah, it's a process. In New York City, they have a district called District 75 that's throughout the city. So in New York City, we may be accustomed to our local school districts. I grew up in District 23. Those are our local school districts, but then there's one that's 75 that's throughout the district. In Westchester and Long Island, what we have is programs called BOCES, Board of Cooperative Educational Services, which I've worked for, and Ms. Claiborne has worked for as well, where we can send our children there. But again, that's a discussion that will start another hour. But there are ways in which the school systems will fight for your child, but you have to be educated in that process. And again, when I say educated, I do not mean you need a doctorate in this, but you have to be self-educated. That's why I've been trying to throw up different resources, and just click away. Stay away from blurbs, from things where people are just not blurbs. What are they called? When people just talk about blogs, when people just talk about what they think. Go to reputable websites, anything that's .gov or anything that's written by reputable authors, but .gov really works. So start there and make sure your resources are reputable, because again, the internet can tell you anything. And again, there's ways where I definitely can be reached on LinkedIn if you have any questions as well. So.
And if you can email me those links, we'll put them in the in the paragraph when we post this video.
I'll give me a couple days so I can look up the best ones, because these are ones that I was just pulling off, but I want to give you a very comprehensive list. So give me a couple days and I'll get that to you. Absolutely.
Thank you. That'll definitely work. Kevin, any final thoughts?
No, I'm just appreciative of all the information we received. It's been another great program. I learned a lot. I'm glad that the resources have been listed throughout the broadcast, and I hope you guys get that pamphlet, book, whatever you need to get out. That sounds like something that'd be truly useful, and maybe I'm gonna email you and give you my suggestions on how this thing might be able to go forward. But I want to thank all the guests.
Yes, definitely. We definitely would love to have you back for a show on BOCES and Kiva on the judicial aspect of education with your friend. You're a New York City school parent?
Oh, now I'm actually a homeschool parent.
Okay.
So I found a homeschool. Well, my daughter's father found a homeschool hub, so she's doing that for the first year. But her from pre-K to to second grade, she was in a private school, African-centered school, but they lost funding, shut down, and then we put her in charter school for her third grade year, and now she's in this homeschool hub. So her reading comprehension is where I was looking forward to having her evaluated and getting the resources, because at home we try, we scream, we yell, we do what we can, but it's not getting through. And so I would like the added support, but again, her dad, feels as if she's undeserving of that title. She's too smart for that title. So again, that stigma, that rebranding, I think a pamphlet is going to kind of create a new tone of what special education looks like, and how you may not even, the route of going through special education may not land you there, but other resources you'll become exposed to. And I think that's the component, that the biggest takeaway that I have to now try to share and explain with him moving forward, because I would like to put her back into the public school sector, because right now she's only around her own, which is fine, but she needs to know how to operate among everyone in the world, not just her own people. So I want her to diversify herself in that respect. So it's ongoing. She's in her fourth year. So once she hits sixth grade, it's kind of too late. I'm like, we got to move on this next year, because time is ticking.
And just do your research on the schools that are state accredited. You have the ability to advocate for those schools as well. A lot of people don't know that. So, just do your research and finding out if they're state approved schools. If they are, that's a school that you can bring to the table and ask the district to pay for. But that's when you get into those heavy conversations, but just make sure you do your work first and knowing, because there are some schools that do exist that pride themselves in educating children, and nothing against what they do, but the district will not pay for them. So you just have to make sure that you know what you're bringing to the table.
And feel free to share our success story. You know, like I said, graduated college with highest of honors, had the cords and everything around when she walked across the stage. So it's definitely not an indication of your child's value.
Right.
You know, yeah.
Right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
It was
you.
great having this
Thank you
conversation.
for having me.
Thank you all so much. We really appreciate it.